Hi, everybody. I hope you're all having a good day today. Today, we're going to talk about Chapter 9, managing conflict. And again, this is a topic that's usually discussed in an interpersonal class, and this is sort of the interpersonal section of this class. And we talked a little bit earlier in another chapter about how we communicate with each other based on our relationships. And we have to sort of understand that a lot of times the communication isn't necessarily always good, or there is miscommunication that happens at times. So when that miscommunication happens, what do we do? How do we handle that? So that's what this chapter talks about. So, uh, what is interpersonal conflict? And when you're talking about interpersonal conflict, you're talking about an expressed struggle. There's a very evident disagreement that we don't agree, right? It's I think this way, you think that way, and we're not meeting on the same page. That's just an expressed struggle, right? You have interdependence. This is a situation where someone just wants to be and wants to have their own thoughts and ideas. Like just because you think that way doesn't mean I think that way. Allow me to come up with my own views, right? And then you have perceived incompatible goals. And when you're talking about perceived incompatible goals, it's about two people being in a relationship. And let's just say that one wants to eat burgers and one wants to eat pizza. And yeah, I mean, those are two separate roads right there, right? And you could think of sort of a more powerful example, like, one wants to have kids, the other one doesn't. One wants to get married, the other one doesn't. You could think of these huge ideas, but just keeping it simple, it's basically, I want this, you want that, and they're nowhere near each other, right? Incompatible goals. This is your goal, this is my goal. We're not going to get there together. It's obviously is heading in two separate directions. And then perceived scarce resources. This is the idea of having very little to do what you want. So let's talk about vacation. Let's go back to the example of burgers versus pizza. We only have $10, right? And we can and to both do what we want. So either that $10 can go to pizza or that $10 can go to burgers, but it can't go to both, right? So what are we going to do? We don't have enough money to do both. The resources are very scarce, right? Or better yet, you decide, okay, cool. We're each going to grab our own thing, but we only have one car. Well, if the idea was to go get the food and bring it back and eat together, and the goal was eating together, but we only have one car and we both want to eat at the same time, then what? One of us is going to have cold food because we only have one car and both of us can't travel in two different directions in one car. That's a scarce resource. We don't have enough, right? So a lot of times that conflict comes from there, right? The next thing we have is called communication climate. And when you're talking about communication climate, I like to think of it as like the air, right? You ever walk into a room and you have nothing to do with what's going on. There's two people already in the room. You walk in and all of a sudden you're like, okay, what's wrong? What's going on here? Right? You could just feel the anger. You could just feel the discussion and why they're angry with each other. You see them and they're like sitting apart and they're not even looking at each other. They're mad and you're like, okay, what's going on? I could feel sort of the anger in the air, right? The tension is usually what they say. That's the communication climate. That's how I like to kind of figuratively point that out, right? So when you're talking about communication climate, how does that develop, or how does that develop positively or negatively? One way of doing it is called confirming messages. Confirming messages is a message that is personal, all-encompassing, and accusatory. I'm sorry, confirming messages, sorry, are messages that are usually positive in their messaging. They confirm who you are, how you feel, and what you see, right? And a lot of times they're very positive in that nature. Disconfirming messages denies the other value of the person. Disconfirming messages will sometimes that imply the lack of agreement or even respect for the other person. And that's things like criticism, right? When that's what I said earlier, which is usually personal and accusatory. Then you have contempt, which is usually verbal or nonverbal messages that ridicule or belittle the other person. Those are disconfirming messages. Okay. Now, how do we sort of end up in a type of communication climate? Well, it goes through a couple of different ways. So the first one is defensiveness, right? We protect ourselves. Um, we protect ourselves for how we are. We stonewall. We refuse to engage with the other person, um, and a lot of times we find ourselves in these different types of communication. Like for example, a relational spiral is a reciprocal communication pattern in which each person messages reinforces the others. Now, mind you, this isn't positive or negative. It's just what's going on. You say something, then I say something, then you say something, and I say it's a spiral, right? It goes down the line, and we're usually um, we reinforce what we're thinking. Then you have escalatory conflict spiral, and this is where reciprocal pattern, where it's confirming or disconfirming the communication that's going on that reinforces sometimes the negative aspects of this communication climate. You have avoidance spirals, which is when neither party really, wants to talk, and we both avoid each other. And then you have positive spirals, which is when confirming messages is just going back and forth to each other, making us feel good about ourselves. I love you. Oh, I love you too. You're the best. I know. Right? So again, that's a positive spiral. Um, then you have conflict communication styles, right? And this is really important to understand because if you understand the type of style you have, you can change it accordingly, especially understanding how the other person sort of reacts to that, right? Then you have what's called non-assertive communication style, and this is the inability or the unwillingness to express own thoughts or feelings. This is really someone who's really not assertive, who just kind of shuts down and really just doesn't want to be active, right? They're non-assertive. Is that positive or negative when it comes to trying to manage a conflict in a communication, right? You have indirect communication, which is hinting at messaging instead of expressing thoughts and feelings directly. How are you feeling today? Fine. Well, are you being indirect or direct? And then where you have passive aggression, which is indirect expression of aggression delivered in a way that follows the sender to maintain a facade of innocence. And you could actually use the last example for this by saying, it's like, well, if you want to do that, if you want to go play with your friends, and you go play with your friends. Well, if you don't want to spend time with me and you'd rather go hang out with so and so, go to a restaurant, then you go do that. Well, geez, all right, I guess I will, right? It's like, well, which one is it? Because you're telling me one thing, but your messaging is something else. Direct aggression is really when you just tell somebody like, hey, I'm just angry with you, and um, and I attack you, and I attack your dignity. I show disrespect, and I really don't think that you're all that together in a positive light, right? And then you have what's called assertive communication. When you're talking about assertive communication, you're really talking about the type of communication where you put yourself out there to say certain things, but you're not necessarily demeaning the other person. You're not necessarily putting yourself down or being demure or or losing respect for yourself, but it's really an action of saying, you know what, let me talk to you. Let's talk about the behavior in question. Um, Let me share what I think of this situation to understand how, so that you can understand how I feel, and then you could tell me what your perspective is. Let me tell you how I feel and why I feel that way, and let me describe, the things I feel might happen if we continue this, and then what's my purpose? What's my intent? What do I want to gain from this discussion? Right? That's being assertive. Now, in negotiating conflict and in negotiating sort of the conflict, there's a couple ways you can do. There's win lose, lose lose, compromise, and win win. Now, this is an interesting situation because most of you have seen compromise as being what we want to do. That's, we reach a compromise. Compromising is great. Is it though? Let's talk about that, right? So we're having a negotiation. We're trying to figure out what we want to do, right? We can have a win-lose situation, and that's when you have two people, and when a win-lose situation, that means somebody wins, somebody loses. Somebody got what they wanted, and somebody didn't. Well, the person who did it, well, then that's really a great strategy for them, right? You got a lose-lose situation, and a lose-lose situation means nobody gets what they want. Well, if you both lost, there really isn't any gain, right? Not really a good one for either. But now, compromise has its positiveness. Compromise means that both of you got a little bit of what you wanted, but it also means that you lost or didn't get part of what you wanted. And that's the rub right there. That's where compromise isn't necessarily always the best way. Because it basically means that, hey, I got some of what I wanted, but I didn't get anything. I didn't get everything, right? The win-win is what you want to do. The win-win is where you want to be able to say to yourself, yeah, we both got what we wanted. So let's go back to the example about burgers and pizzas. I want burgers, you want pizza. We're never going to satisfy each other. Well, wait a second. What if we both agree to go to a place that serves both pizza and burgers, or vice versa, and they're both good. They both satisfy our urges for a good burger and for a good pizza. Whether it's BJ's or whether it's another well-known restaurant chain that serves both. Yeah, all right. The Yard House I think has both. You go to you know what? Love this pizza, love this burger. We both win. We both got what we want. Great. That's a win-win situation right there. Right. So, anyways, so this chapter really kind of talks about how we can develop our relationship so that we can both win. And in doing so, you want to do things like making sure that the other person has their needs satisfied, making sure we brainstorm with each other and think about the different ideas and what are the options that maybe we didn't think about before. And then follow up to make sure that what the solution that we got was actually the best solution. Maybe we could have done something better next time, right? So that follow up is also important. Now, what are some of the social influences on conflict and communication stuff? Again, we come back to gender and conflict stuff. It's very interesting in certain for certain genders based on their physiological differences. Uh, Testosterone, something physical, that's biological. Height, weight. Is someone more assuming? If someone's like a big person and their partner is someone small, then there's a possibility that that could be very authoritative, very overwhelming for the smaller person. That's just physical differences, right? And that's just things that sometimes we have to sort of deal with. Then we have things like early socialization. How did you learn to deal with this early on as a child, and how do you deal with it now as an adult? Conflict dilemmas. Sometimes certain genders are seen to handle certain things because they're sort of expected to do so, or they're sort of told to do so, or maybe it's like it's a no-win situation, right? You tell certain genders, hey, you have to be assertive, but then when they're assertive, they look like jerks. Well, it's like you damned if you don't, right? And then you have commonalities. These are things that you both sort of have in common when it comes to your gender. What are the best ways that we can both sort of handle that fits to our gender and how we can better communicate with each other, right? The last thing we have here is cultural approaches to conflict, individualism versus collectivism. Individualism is really the idea where it's me, the individual, and my happiness. Collectivism is as a group, as a culture. Do we rise together as a culture? In some countries, for example, the success of the individual is the most important, and some other cultures, the success of the group or the family is seen as the goal, right? So that's important too. High and low context. High and low context communication is basically, are you direct with somebody? Do you tell them exactly directly what you want to hear? Or do you sort of hint at it, to where you hope that they get the message, right? And then you have emotional expressiveness. And when you're talking about emotional expressiveness, you're looking at the idea that, in some cultures, it's okay to express yourself and to be out there and really show people how you feel. In other cultures, you, depending on who you are or where you fall within that cultures, are you meant to be quiet and unseen and not heard, right? And so that kind of matters too, right? And so culture has a strong influence on how we handle culture. Anyways, so that's kind of what chapter 9 is about. It's a good chapter. I enjoyed it. And really, if you talk about cultural approaches to conflict, that really leads to another class called culture communication. So that's kind of important too. Anyways, um, so I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Again, if you have any questions, I'm right here. Feel free to reach out. I'm just kind of go from there. All right. Bye, everybody. Take care.